The transport ship hummed quietly as it moved through the dark space between stars, and Commander Jake Morrison sat in the common area, trying to read reports on his datapad, but the words kept blurring together after 3 months of this diplomatic mission. He was tired of sitting in meetings, and tired of being the only human on a ship full of alien species. Virexian delegation had been polite enough, and their leader. Cholera was professional in all their interactions, but Jake knew they didn't take humans seriously. And why would they, when humanity had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago? While the Virexians had been exploring space for over 2,000 years, he stretched his arms above his head and yawned when he heard footsteps approaching, and turned to see 3 Virexian women walking toward him with strange expressions on their faces. And Virexian females were tall and elegant, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the ship's lights, and their eyes were large and dark like pools of ink. The one in front was named Lissa, and she served as Kalara's personal aide, and the other 2 were Zara and Minka, both junior members of the diplomatic corps, and all 3 of them were looking at him with what he could only describe as mischief in their eyes. "Good evening, Commander Morrison," Lissa said in perfect English, though her accent made the words sound musical, and we were wondering if we might ask you something. Jake set down his datapad and nodded. "And sure, what do you need?" Lisa exchanged glances with her companions and smiled. "And we have heard many things about human customs, and we wanted to know if one particular story was true." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And which story is that?" Ara stepped forward, and her voice was lighter than Lissa's, almost playful. "And we heard that humans have a tradition where sitting on someone is a sign of friendship and dominance at the same time. And is this true?" Jake blinked and tried to process what she was asking, and he had no idea where they had gotten that information, and it was completely wrong. But before he could correct them, Minka spoke up. "We thought it would be funny to try," and she giggled, and the sound was strange coming from someone so tall and imposing. And just as a joke of course for Jake could respond, Lissa moved quickly and in one smooth motion. She turned and sat directly on his lap, and her weight was considerable, and he grunted in surprise. And Virexians were denser than humans, and she probably weighed close to 200 pounds, despite her slender frame. The other 2 burst into laughter, and Zara clapped her hands together. "And this is very funny, and look at his face." Jake tried to protest, but Lissa was settled firmly on his lap, and her long legs stretched out in front of her, and she looked back at him with a playful smile. "And you do not mind, do you, Commander? And it is just a cultural exchange." He opened his mouth to explain that this was definitely not a human custom, when something unexpected happened, and a warmth spread through his chest. And not the uncomfortable heat of embarrassment, but something deeper and more primal in his heart. Rate picked up, and his breathing became slightly labored. Lissa's expression changed, and her playful smile faded, and replaced by confusion and "Commander Morrison, and are you all right?" The warmth intensified and spread from his chest to his limbs, and Jake felt his muscles tense, and something ancient and buried deep in human biology was waking up, and something that had nothing to do with modern civilization and everything to do with millions of years of evolutions. Zara stopped laughing, and her dark eyes widened. "And something is wrong with him." Jake tried to speak, but his throat felt tight, and the rational part of his mind knew he should be alarmed. But another part, and a much older part, was taking control, and his hands moved almost without his permission and gripped Lissa's waist and not roughly but firmly. Lissa gasped and tried to stand, but Jake's grip held her in place, and his strength surprised her. And Virexians were stronger than humans in most circumstances, but right now Jake's muscles felt like steel cables. "Commander," and Lissa's voice had lost its playful tone, "and please let go." But Jake couldn't, and his vision had sharpened, and every detail of the room seemed crystal clear, and he could hear the hum of the ship's engines, and the breathing of all 3 Virexian women, and the racing of Lissa's double hearts, and his own heartbeat thundered in his ears like war drums. Minka backed away, and her voice shaking, "And we need to get help." The door to the common area opened, and Cholera strode in, and her expression stern. "And what is happening here?" And I heard raised voices. She stopped when she saw the scene, and Jake holding Lissa on his lap, and the younger Virexian's face showing genuine fear now, and Kalera's eyes narrowed and released her immediately. Human Jake's head turned slowly to face Kalera, and when she saw his eyes, her own widened and they had changed, and the whites were now visible all around the iris and giving him an intense, predatory look that made even the experienced commander take a step back. "Is not possible," Kalera whispered, "and the bonding reflex, and but humans don't have." She was cut off as Jake finally released Lissa, and the Vrexian woman scrambled away and joined her companions, who huddled together near the door, and Jake stood slowly. And his movements were controlled, but there was a coiled tension in them like a spring wound to tight. Kalera held up her hands in Commander Morrison and listened to me carefully. "I need to calm down, and what you are experiencing is a biological response." Jake's breathing was heavy, and he looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time, and what is happening to Mitha? "Bonding reflex," Kalera said, and keeping her voice steady, "and it is something that exists in many species across the galaxy, and a biological trigger that occurs when certain conditions are met in physical contact, combined with specific pheromones, and it creates an intense protective and possessive response, but humans don't have that." Jake managed to say, and his voice was rough, "and we evolved past that. Kind of think." Alara shook her head slowly, "and no species truly evolves past their base biology, Commander, and it seems humans still carry this trait, and though perhaps you have never encountered the right trigger before." Lissa was trembling, and "I did not know, and we thought it was just a joke." Warmth in Jake's chest was beginning to fade, but it left behind something else, and an awareness of Lissa that hadn't been there before, and he could sense her fear and her elevated heart rate, and somehow he knew exactly where she was in the room without looking. "This is going to be a problem," Kalera said quietly, "and once the bonding reflex is triggered, it does not simply go away." "What do you mean?" Jake asked, and he was starting to regain control of himself. "But that new awareness of Lissa remained. It means," Kalera said, "and that on a biological level. You have now imprinted on Lissa, and your body recognizes her as your bonded mate, and you will feel a compulsive need to protect her and to be near her," and she paused, "and to claim her." Jake felt his face flush, and that is not going to happen, and this is just biology, and I can control it. Kalera looked skeptical, and perhaps but the bonding reflex exists for a reason, Commander, and it is one of the most powerful biological drives in the known galaxy, and it has driven beings to cross star systems and to abandon their posts and to forsake their duties. Jake clenched his fists. "And I am not some animal driven by instinct, and I am a human being, and I have free will. We shall see," Kalera said, "and but for now, I think it would be best if you and Lissa were kept separate, and perhaps with time and distance the effects will fade over the next 3 days." Jake learned that Kalera had been optimistic, and the effects did not fade, and if anything, they grew stronger, and he found himself unable to sleep and lying in his quarters and acutely aware that Lissa was 7 decks above him, and he could almost feel her presence like a compass needle pointing north. Tried to focus on his work, but every report and every meeting felt meaningless, and all he could think about was whether Lissa was safe and whether she needed anything, and whether those other Vrexians were treating her well on the 4th day. He broke, and he made his way to the Vrexian quarters and the guards at the door tried to stop him, but something in his eyes made them step aside, and he found Lissa in a small room, and she was sitting by a window looking out at the stars. She turned when he entered, and her expression was complicated. "And Commander Morrison, and you should not be here." "I know," Jake said, but I can't, and I can't stay away." Lissa stood and wrapped her arms around herself, "and this is not fair, and I did not mean for this to happen neither." "Did I?" Jake said, and taking a step closer, but it did, and we have to deal with it." "How?" Lissa asked, and her voice breaking slightly. "And how do we deal with something like this? And you are human, and I am Vrexian, and this should not even be possible." Jake had spent the last 4 days researching everything he could find about the bonding reflex, and he had learned that it was rare, but not unheard of between different species, and the key factors were compatible pheromones and physical contact, and something that the texts called resonance, was the hardest thing to define, and it was a kind of recognition that happened on a level deeper than conscious thought, and two beings whose life patterns matched in some fundamental way, and whose biological rhythms synchronized have been reading about this, Jake said. And from what I understand, the bonding reflex only triggers when there is true compatibility, and it means that on some level we fit together.